Hi, this is Kevin for Pixavert.com. In this video we're going to be creating this disintegration effect in Photoshop CS6. This is going to be a slightly more advanced tutorial that some of you have been asking for. And I'm working with a very large image, so if you'll need to adapt some of the settings if you're working with a small image or with a truly gigantic image. I'm going to keep the image open and use it maybe as a reference if we need to, but we'll start afresh with the original image. I'm going to make a duplicate copy of that image, and we'll call the duplicate copy plot. This is going to act as a sort of a backdrop for our image, because we're going to be working with the layers and making a kind of almost 3D effect with the composition. I'm going to make another copy, and we'll call that clip 1, and duplicate that, call that clip 2. Now we'll turn off the two clip layers and create a background. The background is one that I use a fair amount, so I've got an action created for it. Just basically a radial blue background. We'll turn on the plot layer and apply a filter, high pass filter. This is an effect that I used in my, I think, the grunge text tutorial to create a texture from a photograph. And in this case we're actually going to put this on soft light. I've put it on hard light so you can see the effect a bit more clearly. It's just going to act as a backdrop, almost like a blueprint. But we'll put it back on normal for the time being, and I'm going to draw a circle around the area that I intend to work. So I'm just using the marquee tool, and we'll use that to create a layer mask around the plot layer, and I'll just switch off the clip layer. We're going to create a group and a new layer within that group. We're going to work on this new layer using the brush tool, so I'm going to bring up the brush tool. This is the default set of brushes that you get in Photoshop CS6, and I've created one of my own here, and I'll show you just what I did there. In the brush tip shape, I've given it a roundedness of 45%, so that makes it elliptical, as you can see with these samples here. The hardness remains at 100%, and the spacing is, I've taken the spacing all the way down to 1%. That means we get a bunch of scattered particles, and then we get these tiny particles flowing out as you drag the brush. In the shape dynamics, the important thing here is size jitter, which is at 100%. I've given it a fade and a minimum diameter of 10%, and equally some angle and roundedness jitter, and a minimum roundedness of 23%. The scattering is at 1000% each way, and that gives us this kind of scattered detail. And I've also turned the smoothing on, but you could work with your own brush, or maybe use more than one brush. I'm just going to increase the size of the brush a little bit, and what I want to do is to work within this circle here, and I'm just going to try and cover a generous amount of the model's face. Let me just zoom in a little bit. And once I've done that, I'm going to turn on the clip 1 layer and clip it to group 1. And we can now take the plot layer and put that on soft light so that it fades into the background and just gives us a nice piece of decoration at the back there. I'm going to continue with my brush strokes here, and I don't mind if I create a few of these tiny little brush strokes around the shoulders, but in most other areas I want the bigger chunky brushes, so I'm just going to drag it a tiny amount. I want some space to remain within the face. I think that's a good idea, and probably for the purposes of this video I'm going to not give as much coverage as I would really like, but I'm just going to make sure that we've got some of this scattered detail right at the bottom there. And again, some scattered detail in this model's veil. That just adds to that disintegration effect. Someone asked a question about the model in one of my previous videos, and I just had this kind of double take moment and realized I probably used a photograph of the same model in a number of videos. This model here might actually be the same one. It's difficult to tell because she's quite often wearing a veil, but if it is the same model, then she's very photogenic. So we are going to group clip 1 and group 1, but before we do that I'm going to add a few layer styles to group 1. I'm going to add a drop shadow, maybe increase the distance to around 29, size to around around 18. We're going to keep the global light at around 30 degrees for all these layer styles. And I'm going to choose a bevel and emboss. Here I'm going to take the depth down just a bit. We want something pretty subtle. 52 will do. The size, something very small, maybe 4. And the soften, we don't want to soften it too much. 1 will do. And that just adds a little bit of a highlight. And a bit of depth. And the drop shadow just adds to that perception of depth. We're going to hit OK, and then we'll group the clip 1 and group 1 together and create group 2. Now, as you probably guessed, I'm going to turn on clip 2 and clip it to group 2. That spoils things because we lose all those layer effects and instead they become a part of the clipping group. So if we turn off these layer effects, we just get what we started with before applying the layer effects. But I'm going to use that. I'm actually going to use this weird looking effect. In group 2, I'm going to create a new layer. We'll take that to the bottom of the stack, and that's pretty important. There we are. It's at the bottom of group 2. And here I'm going to use my brush once again, and this time I'm going to be fairly delicate. It is important here that I'm using black. Now, I'm going to turn down the fill opacity so you can see what this will look like when I've finished. But I'm going to do that on the clip 2 layer. This is pretty important. So we turn down the fill opacity there, and we can see that we're actually painting with black. If we take the fill all the way down to 0, we just get nothing but black. But at 25, we get a subtle mixture between the original image and the color that I'm using. So black is important here. So black is important in group 2, nowhere near as important what color you're using in group 1. And I'm not going to do too much here. I'm just going to add some detail. And if I zoom in, you should be able to see that we're getting a nice looking kind of depth effect here. You can kind of see the way this is turning into almost like a layered 3D kind of design. We're going to add some layer effects to group 2, and we'll start off with the bevel and emboss. Maybe take the depth down a little bit, take the size up, and the soften can go up a little bit. I want to see the layer effects of the original group 1 as well as the layer effects of this layer, both of them visible. So we want two different effects happening. So if I turn this off, you can see the really subtle bevel and emboss of layer 1, and added onto that the much more lumpy bevel and emboss of this layer, and they're sort of interacting together there. We're going to add a drop shadow, a proper drop shadow. That gives us a black drop shadow. We're going to take the opacity down to around 50%. The distance can go up a fair amount. It's going to be a fairly dramatic looking drop shadow. And the size, around 50 pixels will do. And that's more or less it for the time being for group 2. We're going to take everything in group 2 and group 1 and create group 3. And in group 3, I'm going to create a shape. So I'm just going to move that shape up and drag it into group 3. It should fall to the bottom, to the base of group 3, and that's exactly what's happened. I'm going to open up group 3, and what we'll do actually, we'll create another group, group 4. We'll call this group Chroma. This is the group that's going to add a lot of color to the background. I'm going to duplicate that layer and move it, maybe resize it. And give it a different color. We can add actually a bevel and emboss to this group. So depth at 100, size all the way up to 250, soften up to maybe 6. And a drop shadow as well. Going to choose multiply, drop the opacity down a bit, distance down at 0, and the size maybe around 40. I'm going to continue adding these decorations. So that's just adds a little bit of interesting detail to the background, gives a splash of color. Next we're going to go back to group 1, and in group 1 I'm going to create a shape, again a circle. I'm just going to place the circle just above the shoulder, above the lip and above the nose. And that's great. That just solidifies that area there. I'm going to actually duplicate that, and we'll move this duplicate until it's around center. Control Alt and T to make a duplicate copy of that and expand it. Now I'm going to make sure that I select the front shape, this shape here, or the center shape, and I'm going to move it to front if necessary, and then we're going to subtract it from the front, and that just creates a ring of substance around here. Just going to resize the smaller ring, just make this ring a little bit wider, smaller circle to make the ring a little bit wider. And we are going to combine those shapes, so merge shape components. I'm going to duplicate that layer, drag it to group 2, and it goes down to the bottom of group 2. I'm going to resize that, and I'm just going to place this ring around there, just off center of the model's face. And again, that just adds a bit of substance to this part of the image. We'll accept that and change the color of that to black. Going back to group 1, I'm going to go to the shape that we just created. Underneath it, I'm going to create a new layer, and we're going to do another of these final edits. What I want there is one of the new brushes, this one here, and just going to paint around the shoulder area. This gives us this nice looking filament detail. And I'm going to do that on the skin. I like the way this just, it looks as though she might be eroding, or maybe even, you know, like sometimes in science fiction movies you get someone's skin being repaired using some kind of biosynthesis technique. So this could be like a disintegration effect. It could almost also be a synthesis effect. So it could be like she's kind of like generating new muscle fibers in that part of her body. But that's basically it. We're going to zoom out now. Maybe group everything together. And we'll include the background plot as well. And we can then move everything until it's centered. And that's our finished image, a very colorful image. It's supposed to be a disintegration, but it could almost like be a synthesis. It could almost be like these things are being attracted to the central shape. So you could actually take this in a different direction and make it like a synthesis rather than a disintegration effect, I suppose. The idea is just basically to create this impression of depth, lots of variation, and the impression that action is happening inside of the image, that things are either moving together or falling apart. You can interpret it whichever way you prefer. So that's basically it for this video. Hope you found that useful. If you've got any questions, just leave them in the comments area below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed the video. Subscribe for more videos. Till next time, Thanks for watching. Take care. Bye.